As you all are finding your seats, I'm going to invite you to open to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26, we're going to be continuing through the book of Matthew in our series entitled Our King. And the question that we are going to ask and see some answers to this morning is, what is the king worth to you? This is a personal question. I'm not just asking. It's not just a blanket that I'm throwing over this the congregation. This is a personal question. What is the king worth to you? We see in the Bible, y'all remember Moses. He was born a prince of Egypt, and he threw in his lot with Israel, with his kinsmen. And Hebrews chapter 11, verse 26 tells us that he did that because he considered the reproach of Christ of more riches than all the treasures of Egypt. That's how much he valued the king. Very similar to what Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, verse 7, where he says, whatever gain I had, I count as loss for the sake of Christ. That's how much the king was worth to Paul. Kind of on the opposite side of that, in Mark chapter 10, verses 21 through 22, conversation that I'm sure many of you are familiar with between Jesus and the rich young ruler. And it ends with Jesus saying this, one thing you lack, go and sell all you possess and give it to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. But it says, at these words he was saddened, and he went away grieving, because he was a man who owned a lot. The reason he was sad and the reason Jesus would say something like that is because what he said in Matthew chapter 10, verse 37, anyone who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Jesus can make a statement like that and it be true because of what he said in Matthew chapter 13, verse 44, which is that the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found, and he hid it again. And then in his joy, he went and sold everything that he had and bought that field. That's the surpassing value of the kingdom. The question then for us is, how much do we value the kingdom? How much do we value the king? What is he worth to you? You look in the Psalms, and he was of great worth to them. Psalm chapter 19, verses 9 through 10 say that the judgments of the Lord are more to be desired than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter than honey and the drippings from the honeycomb. Or the Psalms say, Psalm 84, verse 10, that one day in the court of the Lord is better than 1,000 outside. All over the Bible, the question is begged, what is the king worth to you? We're going to see that question asked today and answered in three ways, three different valuations of Jesus, three different parties, three different groups, three different individuals that answer that question in different ways. What is the king worth to you? So we just came through chapter 24 and chapter 25. Now we're in chapter 26. That's how chapters work. Here we are in chapter 26, and Jesus opens up. He's just been talking about his second coming and the conquering king sitting enthroned. And he opens up chapter 26. It says, when Jesus had finished all these words, he said to his disciples, you know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man is to be handed over for crucifixion. So Jesus, over the last few weeks, last couple of months that we've seen, Jesus has effectively, I think, removed any idea of the conquering Messiah of Israel. That's what a lot of people had in their mind when they thought about the Messiah. They knew that he was going to set them free, but what they had in their mind was set free from the worldly oppression that they were experiencing. And I think Jesus has effectively removed that idea from their minds by letting them know, yes, the king will be enthroned, the kingdom will be established in all authority for all eternity, but that's not happening this time around. Jesus just told us in chapter 25 that's going to happen on his second return. What's going to happen this time around is what he just said in chapter 26, verse 2, and that is that the Son of Man is going to be handed over to be crucified. So this is it. This is the climax of the book of Matthew. It took us a couple of years to get here, but this is why we're here. This is the final act. Jesus Christ crucified. And what we're going to see today in verses 3 through 16 are setting the stage for us for that crucifixion. So Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, the celebration there, is going to be replaced by Jesus' tragic exit on the cross. And to set the stage for that, we see three valuations of Jesus answering the question, what is the king worth to you? First, we're going to see the chief priests, how they answer that question in verses 3 through 5. Second, we're going to see how a woman answers that question, an unnamed woman answers that question in verses 6 through 13. And then finally, we're going to see how Judas answers that question in verses 14 through 15. So I'm going to pray for us one more time, and then we'll pick up in verse 3. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity that we have this morning. I thank you for this opportunity that I have this morning to be in your word, to be equipped and taught by it. Father, I pray that I and all of us would be humble enough to hear your word and to be equipped and rebuked and built up however we need to be in order to glorify you in the world. Father, I trust that you are able, in my heart and in their heart, to set aside all of the pilfering distractions of the world so that we can look to your word and see you this morning so that we can glorify you every morning. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. So picking up in verse 3, it says, Then the chief priests and the elders of the people were gathered together in the court of the high priest, named Caiaphas. They plotted together to seize Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they were saying, not during the festival, otherwise a riot might occur among the people. So we're kind of picking up where we left off in chapter 23. Chapter 23, Jesus has come into Jerusalem, triumphal entry, big party. Jesus has made some pretty explosive comments like, if these kids don't worship me, then these rocks will. So he's made very clear who he is and what his status is, which has flown right into the face of the chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes and all those religious leaders of the time who see Jesus as an opponent. So Jesus, he says, he doesn't mince any words in Matthew chapter 23. If you wanted to get back in your quiet time this week, go and read through chapter 23. Jesus is very direct with the Pharisees, and he calls them hypocrites. And so then we have a sort of parentheses of chapter 24 and 25 where Jesus retreats, talks with his disciples, and then we see him come back into the picture, and that's where chapter 26 picks up for us. So Jesus has just, I didn't research this, but I don't think microphones were invented during Jesus' time, but Jesus has just mic dropped on the Pharisees, left, just pieced out, and now he is back on the scene, and we see that that's where we pick up here in verse 3, the Pharisees and all their hurt feelings about Jesus. And they're saying we need to get him and we need to kill him. And we need to do it stealthily. And I love that it adds the detail in here that they're hesitant just for one reason. And that one reason is if we do it during the festival, then there might be a riot. Which actually brings to mind kind of the one thing that we know for sure about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the chief priests, the religious leaders of that time, is that they cared greatly about personal appearances. Like that was like their main thing. Back in Matthew chapter 21, Jesus asked them a question. He said, where did John the Baptist's power come from? Was it from man or was it from heaven? Y'all remember this? And it said they couldn't answer. And it even broke down their reasoning. They said, well, if we say this, then the people are going to be mad at us. And if we say this, then these people are going to be mad at us. So they opted to just say, I don't know. that because they were so worried about losing face with the people. That's why in chapter 23, when Jesus is pronouncing woes on the Pharisees, he says, y'all love to be called teacher. You love the choice seats whenever you go to events. You love the praise of men. And it's because of that we kind of understand why, one, Jesus wasn't a fan of those guys, and two, those guys hated Jesus because Jesus was ruining everything. They had set up a system where they were on top, and Jesus says they had put burdens on the people's backs that they wouldn't even lift a finger to help them with. And so Jesus coming, he's messed up the whole system, and the Pharisees, they hate him, and they say, we got to kill this guy. So we ask the question, what is Jesus worth to them? They set aside all of the facts about the fact that, Jesus healed people. He taught with authority and accuracy. He gave sight to the blind. He raised people from the dead. He went into Jerusalem claiming Old Testament scriptures to be about himself. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the chief priests, they were so wrapped up in their own pride and their own world of comfort and convenience and authority that they couldn't see him as anything but a threat. They said, we got to seize this guy. So we saw, Moses, he saw the reproach of Christ as more valuable than all the treasures of Egypt. And the chief priests, they saw their little tiny realms of authority as more valuable than the Son of Man, than Jesus. They said, we got to kill him. If we're not careful, we can kind of fall into that trap a little bit. It was true for them then. Remember, these are religious people. These aren't just blatant sinners that we're talking about here. These were religious people. And that can happen to us, where we pay lip service to Jesus, and we're even content to give a little bit of money to the cause. But when push comes to shove, what we really care about is our comfort and our convenience. We love this kind of American Jesus that is good to have around, but he doesn't take up too much space. He doesn't ask too much of us. And when something else takes precedence, he's pretty understanding. But that's not the Jesus that we see in the Bible. Jesus in the Bible takes up all the space. If he isn't taking up all the space, he's not there at all. So when I see this about the chief priests getting all bent out of shape about Jesus, I see a warning in there for us. Don't be like them. Don't care about the world more than you care about Jesus. Jesus is much more valuable than the world. Jesus is the only treasure that you can pursue wholeheartedly that isn't going to pull the old bait and switch on you at the end. You make your life about comfort and convenience. You make your life about fame and success. Or you make your life about money or pleasure. Eventually, those rivers all dry up. I don't think this is new information for anybody in the room. But not Jesus. We build our life on comfort and convenience, then we are quick to thank God when things are going good, and even quicker to curse God when things go wrong. The life that's built on comfort and convenience, the prideful life, can never say what Job said. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You'll be incapable of saying that thing. This is a good litmus test for us. Look at yourself. You know your life. Talk to your spouse about this because they know. How do you respond when things go terribly wrong in your life? That's how you can know how valuable Jesus is to you. Actually, probably a better question is, how do you respond when you are slightly inconvenienced in your life? That'll let you know how valuable Jesus is to you, what you have really built your hope on. And that's where the chief priests were. Jesus had told them 50 times what the problem was. You look good on the outside, but your hearts are dead. You are far from me. You pay lip service to me, but your hearts are miles away. Jesus had told them several times what the problem was, and the only thing that they could think is, we got to kill him. And we got to do it stealthily, too. The part that, I don't know if this is actually funny, but it kind of cracks me up when I read this, and the idea of like, they hate Jesus so much that they have to kill him. But they say, but we can't do it during the festival because of why? because there will be a riot. They're so worried about appearances, which is why they have to kill Jesus, that they can't kill Jesus because they know the people are going to riot. I don't think they're concerned about the people when they say, "Oh, we don't want a riot on our hands." So that's the first valuation of Jesus. The chief priests, they look at Jesus and they see him as a threat because their value is in their own pride, their own comfort, their own convenience, the system, the little world that they've set up for themselves in their religiosity. And I love that it's juxtaposed by verses 6 through 13, where we see a very different valuation of Jesus in the woman. Picking up in verse 6, it says, "Now when Jesus was in Bethany, at the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume. She poured it on his head as he reclined at the table. The disciples were indignant when they saw this and said, 'Why this waste? For this perfume might have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor.' Jesus, aware of this, said, 'Why do you bother the woman? For she has done a good deed to me. You will always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. For when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of in memory of her.'" So here we have the opposite of the chief priest. This is a woman who values Jesus so much that she sacrifices her costly perfume, her costly oil, to anoint his head. And Mark chapter 14 tells us that this vial, this oil, the perfume was extremely valuable. It says it here in the text, but Mark chapter 14 tells us that it was worth 300 denarii, which was about a year's salary. So very valuable. But the focus, of course, is not the value of the perfume, but the valuation of the woman who gave the perfume to Jesus. The value of the perfume just tells us how much she valued Christ. Now, we're going to come back to the disciples because they get a little bit out of shape about this. But Jesus says that she has done this to prepare me for burial. That's verse 12. And I don't think that that's really the intention that the woman had. I think that if this had been an overt burial ceremony, then the disciples would have picked up on that. They would have known what was going on, but instead they were indignant. So what I see happening here really is this woman, this is her sacrifice, a gift that she's brought to the Christ because she values him. And in turn, Jesus has placed on that gift an honor that exceeds anything that she could have expected. Jesus kind of says that this gift was providentially there to prepare him for burial. And I love this because that's really how the gospel works, is whatever little or whatever lot that you have, we bring it to Jesus. Jesus bestows on it more honor than we ever could. And then in turn, he bestows on us more honor than we could have expected. Jesus said, wherever the gospel is preached, this woman will be remembered. And the proof of that is right here on the paper in front of you. Wherever this Bible goes, this woman's story goes because she valued Jesus enough to give him this gift. So Jesus, we give, whether it's a little or a lot, we value Jesus enough to give of ourselves. Jesus receives it, he puts honor on it, and he places honor on us. You think about the thief on the cross. This man had literally nothing to give Jesus except for a heart of faith. And Jesus said, "You're going to be in paradise." So little was brought before Jesus, so little relative value placed on Jesus. And Jesus took it and responded with eternal reward. That's the gospel. That's how valuable Jesus is. And I think it's important that we pay attention to that fact so that we're not thrown off by kind of the oddity of verses 9 through 11. Jesus is supremely valuable. So when the disciples, I think their hearts are in the right place, but when the disciples say, "Well, why this waste? This could have been sold and the money given to the poor. We could have fed people with this. Why this waste?" And Jesus says, "You're always going to have the poor with you, but you're not always going to have me. It's no waste." He said something very similar, I think, in chapter 9 when he was approached and people asked the question, why don't your disciples fast? We're supposed to be fasting, right? Why don't your disciples ever fast? And Jesus told them, they have no need to fast. I'm right here. Because we know that fasting is it's a way for us to kind of clear the weeds so we can see God, get all the distractions out of our way. And Jesus is saying, why do they need to fast? I'm here. So he wasn't saying for all time that fasting is not important. He was saying in that moment that he took precedence. And that's the same thing that he's saying here. Obviously, the Bible doesn't teach don't take care of the poor because you're going to always have the poor. Jesus is teaching here that I take precedence in this moment. It's no waste that she anointed my head with the oil. You're always going to have the poor. You're not always going to have me. She has done a good thing. So we see here the priests valued themselves more than they valued Jesus. This woman, who will be remembered wherever this gospel goes, valued Jesus enough to sacrifice, to give a costly gift to honor him. And then finally, we're going to see the last valuation of the king in Judas, verses 14 through 16. It says, Then one of the 12, named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, What are you willing to give me to betray him to you? And they weighed out 30 pieces of silver to him. And from then on, he began looking for a good opportunity to betray Jesus. Now, I've never really noticed this before, but I was kind of struck by the fact that it says that Judas went to the chief priests. So Judas wasn't cornered. He wasn't swindled. It doesn't seem like there was any pressure put on Judas. Judas went to the chief priests and he said, What are y'all willing to pay for Jesus? And they said, How about 30 pieces of silver? And Judas said, Deal. I'll take it. So when I asked the question, what is Jesus worth to you? What's the king worth to you? That question kind of came from this interchange here. Because what was the king worth to Judas? 30 pieces of silver. I wonder if the chief priest could have gotten away with 29 pieces of silver or 25. 30 pieces of silver is what it took. Just to put that in perspective, the vial of perfume that the woman dumped on Jesus' head was worth about a year's salary, roughly, in modern language. 30 pieces of silver would have been about 3 months. That's what Jesus was worth to Judas. Now, Judas, I imagine he was disgruntled. John chapter 12 tells us that he was a thief, that he used to help himself to the money that was in the bag as they were traveling around. So Judas, he loved money. And so I can just imagine as Judas hopped on the Jesus bandwagon that he had this image in his mind of the conquering Messiah, that the whole system's about to be turned on its head, and I'm in the inner circle. I'm going to be rolling with Jesus up to Jerusalem whenever he takes his position. So I bet that Judas, being a lover of money, was pretty disgruntled by this point. Because he had been with Jesus. He thought he was on the bandwagon that was going to lead to power and wealth. And Jesus just kept saying things like, the first will be last and the last first. Jesus is like, what? Or he would say, you have to die in order to follow me. Take up your cross. Or he would say something like, the world hates me and it's going to hate you. Or foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Or the Son of Man is going to be handed over to be crucified. And before his eyes, the gravy train that Judas thought he was on is drying up. Because he loved money. I think of Judas as kind of a foil or an opposite for Zacchaeus. You know, Zacchaeus was he was a swindler, he was a tax collector, and he had cheated people out of a lot of money. He had the money, but he wasn't content with that. He was restless, he wasn't at peace, so much so he climbed a tree just to see Jesus. And here we have Judas, who is with Jesus all the time, but he's not at peace. He's restless because what he really wants is a little bit of money. And he got it. 30 pieces of silver is not bad. But Matthew chapter 27, verses 3 through 5 tells us what happened with Judas. So he betrays Jesus. Matthew chapter 27 says, Then when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse. And he returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I've sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, What is that to us? See to that yourself. And he threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed. And he went away and hanged himself. When I read this tragedy of Judas, it is a tragedy. I'm reminded of one of my favorite verses in the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10, which says, The one who loves silver will never be satisfied with silver. The one who loves income with his wealth. This too is vanity. And that's a truth that we are aware of. It's well documented in human history, in literature, in film, in the discontentment of the wealthy. We all know this, that the more you love money, the less you're satisfied with money. The goalpost is always moving. You never quite get enough. And that's what Judas experienced. He had the money, but it wasn't enough to cover over his guilt. And it never will be. That's why the Bible is full of warnings for us to protect us from a love of money. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, you can't serve God and money. You can't serve two masters. It's just not going to work. Then Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5 says, make sure that your character is free from the love of money, being content with what you have. For he himself said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. So the author of Hebrews is saying, keep yourself free from the love of money. And the reason that he gives is because God himself has said, I will take care of you. He says, be content. What can $1 million do for you that the God of the universe can't? That's what the author of Hebrews is saying. And if I'm being honest with you all, and obviously I like to do that when I'm up here, I like to be honest with you guys, not just when I'm up here, but anytime. I know the heart of Jordan Clark well enough. I know my soul well enough that when I'm discontent with my house, when I'm feeling discontent towards my wife, my family, even my church, no offense, I know my soul well enough to know that that's because my valuation of Jesus Christ is slipping. I don't think there's a thing wrong with my house or my cars or my wife or my family or any of you guys. When I feel discontent, I know my soul well enough to know that the problem is not with anything that I'm looking at here. It's because I've taken my eyes off the value of Christ. I've forgotten what the Bible says here. Be content, because he said, I will take care of you. So when I feel that discontentment rising in me, I do whatever I can to kill it, to get myself back on target. Because if you let that stuff fester in your life, that's how you become a betrayer. That's how you sell out the Son of God for 30 pieces. That's how you become an adulterer. You let that discontent fester. That's how you end up in prison, because you defrauded the government on your tax forms. You end up a divorcee. You end up whatever. Watch yourselves for that. Discontentment is not a reflection of a bad situation. If that's what you think, you should read The Hiding Place. Discontentment is not a reflection of a bad situation or God isn't giving you enough. It's a reflection of your own heart, of not seeing the value of Christ. That's what it is in my life, and I imagine that's the same for you all as well. We have to fight against that. Don't love money. That's definitely not the answer. Don't put your trust in money. Don't run after money. That's what Judas did, and it betrayed him, and he hanged himself. Put your trust in God. Value God. Run after him. And he will not dissatisfy. He won't disappoint. So when we ask the question, what is the king worth to you? That's an important question for us to answer, because that's what's going to keep you centered in your life. What is the king worth to you? It's a personal question. If you want to talk about it with somebody, I encourage you to. What is the king worth to you? We have to answer that question here, because the rest of chapter 26 and chapter 27 is concerned with a different question. We have to answer the question of what is the king worth to me, because the rest of 26 and 27 is all about what you were worth to the king. Enough to struggle and suffer and die. That's how Jesus values you. And that's why we ask the question, how much do I value him?